Joining us now, the Montana Senator, Tim Sheehy. He's a former aerial firefighter, also a former Navy SEAL, I just learned. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. You used to run a company that uses these so-called super scooper planes. Tell us about that.
Well, as you just mentioned in your last segment, these aircraft that are coming in flying, they're either dropping retardant or water. They're a key part of especially the initial attack phase of these wildfires, because getting ground crews up there, sometimes if in rough mountain terrain, it can take a long time to get ground firefighters on scene. So the aircraft are oftentimes our best chance to get to that fire quickly, get a defensive line in place, and do a direct initial attack. They're a key part of our fire response.
So these planes, they scoop up the water, let's say there's a lake or even the Pacific, and then they dump the water on top of fire areas, right?
Exactly right. So those videos you saw of the yellow planes flying in the ocean, those are the type of planes that I flew as recently as September. I was out water bombing. And then the larger airliner type planes drop retardant. And these both type of planes, one is a defensive, makes a fire perimeter with retardant, and one drops water directly on the flames to attack the fire.
I know you've said that the U.S. now faces what you're calling a year-round 50-state fire threat, and say there is a bipartisan solution to all of this. What does that look like?
Well, we have to rethink wildfire, Wolf. Over 100 years ago, the Great Chicago Fire and many other great fires caused us to realize we needed urban fire departments, we needed building codes, we needed fire hydrants. We didn't have things like that, and our cities burned to the ground. Now we're seeing in the last year and a half, Lahaina, Hawaii burned to the ground. New Jersey had terrible fires. Texas had the largest fire in Texas history last year, and now we're seeing our largest city in America being burned to the ground. So we need to get serious about having ready wildfire solutions year-round all over the country, because as we see, even in January, wildfire is a very real threat. We have to overhaul a cross-cutting through the bureaucracy solution to make sure we're actually ready to fight these fires wherever they occur.
I got a funding question. You're a member of the U.S. Senate now, funding critically important. How is fighting wildfires, Senator, treated differently than regular firefighting from a funding perspective?
Almost entirely, Wolf. It's actually sickening if you look at how we pay our wildland firefighters versus how we pay our urban firefighters or our military members. We take great care of our military men and women from a healthcare perspective, VA benefits to their salary. It's not perfect, but it's pretty darn good. Our wildland firefighters are treated like seasonal employees. They're underpaid. They don't get medical benefits. If they're hurt or injured on the job, many times they get workers' comp and that's it. So from compensating the professionals that do this job to also realizing that it's going to cost $50+ billion to recover from this terrible disaster in LA. If we would have spent a small fraction of that on having enough helicopters, airplanes, and firefighters in place ahead of time, $1 of prevention is worth $1,000 of recovery.
Are you going to make that happen?
Absolutely. I'm already working across the aisle. Just right before I came over here on the floor of the Senate talking to our Democrat colleagues, this is a bipartisan solution in a very polarized time for our country. I think this is an issue we can really find bipartisan unity on to better serve the American people.
Bipartisan solution is so important. CNN has learned, Senator, that President-elect Trump is in talks right now to visit Los Angeles, perhaps as early as next week. I want to play something that Trump said back in September. Listen to this.
Gavin Newsom is going to sign those papers. And if he doesn't sign those papers, we won't give him money to put out all his fires. And if we don't give him the money to put out his fires, he's got problems. He's a lousy governor.
Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, says Trump tried to deny the state aid during his first term, first 4 years. Should Californians now worry that he will seek to do that again?
I don't think so. I think what you're hearing from the president is pretty clear that a lot of the issues that we're now seeing with these wildfires are coming from local management solutions that have failed. I fought fires in California this year, in fact. There'll be times where you can't scoop out of a body of water with those awesome yellow planes you were talking about that scoop water. You can't scoop out of this lake even though it's right next to the fire. You've got to go 20 miles further because we're going to protect the Eurasian snailfish or whatever. And you're prioritizing Endangered Species Act, environmental causes over the safety and well-being of your residents. And nowhere is that more frustrating than California. And for a lot of these policies, they have consequences. And now we're not pointing blame. I'm simply stating a simple fact that policies have consequences. And if we're going to restrict water usage, if we're going to limit timber leases, if we're going to take our aircraft off contract in the winter, if we're going to reduce our fire budget in a city by $18 million, then we have to be ready for what those consequences are going to be.
But when President-elect Trump becomes president, you want him to support the people in California who have gone through this disaster.
Oh, and I have no doubt that he will, but I wouldn't. It's totally reasonable for him to expect changes as a result of that. Say, I'm not simply going to subsidize poor management. There were clearly failures in the chain of command here. We're not criticizing the firefighters on the ground at all, but the government structure around this, in California specifically, has been very poor in recent years, and he's going to expect reforms before he writes the big check.
All right, Senator, thanks so much for coming in. Quick question before I let you go, though. Tomorrow, the confirmation hearing for Pete Hegseth begins. He's been nominated to be the next defense secretary. As I mentioned, you're a former Navy SEAL. Will you support his nomination? We're
planning to support him. I've had some great meetings and discussions with him. And listen, that's what these hearings are for. Bring these nominees in and ask the tough questions. I think he's going to do great. He's addressed a lot of the concerns about his background. We'll see what he has to say tomorrow. But the reality is, having a combat veteran of the modern global war on terror generation is very important for me. My wife is a Marine veteran of Afghanistan. All my friends are combat veterans of this war. So it's very important for us to see a member of our generation have a shot at running one of the most important agencies in the American government, and an agency that needs reforms.
Do you think he's qualified?
I think he is. Harvard, Princeton, Army officer, combat veteran.
All right, Senator, thanks so much for coming in. Senator Pete Hegseth, not Senator Pete Hegseth, Senator Tim Sheehy, thank you very much from Montana.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.